So, panel number 2. All the panelists are up there with all their main affiliations, so let's not, I won't spend too much time on that. The question of this panel actually has 2 parts. How is the Turing test being used today, and is it still relevant? How it is being used today, it is factual, whether you know how it is being used or not. And is it still relevant? Of course, there are 4 people here, we'll hear 5 opinions, and we'll see about its relevance. I assume that the Turing test now is not one of the 7 or 8 particular setups that Alan Turing put in, but in general, fooling people that on the other side is not a human, but it's a machine. So in general, people being fooled in a dangerous or in a benign way. So let's start. 4 minutes, and I'll be non-Greek in trying to hold on to the time. We'll see how well this will go. So, Abeba.
Yeah, thank you. Great. I guess there are 2 components. One is the idea of thinking or intelligence, which is, I think it's been covered in previous talks, the original question of can machines think, but that has been mostly kind of theoretical in a thought experiment. But then the way that was operationalized was can machines imitate humans? So I will address the 2 components. First, I'll start with the intelligence or thinking or cognition part. So on the one hand, I think people have been kind of doing all kinds of evaluation and testing, breaking down the problem of thinking in bite-sized chunks, testing for state-of-the-art models for reasoning, for abstract reasoning, for common sense, for mathematical reasoning, and so on. And Gary has covered most of the empirical evidence, and the conclusion from that is that we are nowhere near having machines that are solving analogical reasoning or common sense reasoning or mathematical reasoning and so on. Maybe at best we have evidence that is inconclusive. As again, Gary mentioned various papers, including the recent one that came out from Apple. On the theoretical side, the idea of cognition, and since Gary has covered a lot of the empirical stuff, I'll move on to kind of the conceptual and theoretical problems with the idea of trying to define thinking and cognition and intelligence, and how from early days on, this has been really associated with eugenics and with white supremacy, racism, all kinds of problems you can think of, and even now, if you look at the kind of thinking and definition that has been provided by the proponents of AGI, for example, you have Shane Legg in his 1997 thesis that has defined, or that has kind of literally taken definition of intelligence from early days of psychometrics, that has been associated with the works of Carl Pearson and Galton and Spearman and others. So this kind of definition is problematic. Historically, we have seen it being used to justify forced sterilization, segregation, immigration bans, and so on. And currently, the way we have been thinking about intelligent machines is still not completely kind of removed from that lineage of eugenics thinking. So it's not only the definition that has been kind of rooted in these problematic notions, also current machine learning systems, current LLMs, from also the ground up, they amplify and exacerbate this notion of hierarchical understanding of intelligence, where the privileged cisgendered white man is at the top of the hierarchy, where everyone else is like less capable. And now, I'm jumping a lot here because I only have 4 minutes. And now, if you
have 30 seconds.
Okay. Now, if you look at state-of-the-art machine learning systems or LLMs, you find that these systems inherently encode these existing notions of ableism and this notion of white supremacy. If you look at their application in hiring or in medical spaces or in law enforcement, what you find is that these notions are extremely encoded, and these systems kind of exacerbate this. And I will very quickly say about the imitation. I think we can all agree that now machines imitate, and the question shouldn't be can they imitate, but rather why, and why do we want that? Because we have voice cloning systems, we have deepfakes, and you have now AI companions that are intentionally designed to deceive and to mislead people. And so far we have 3 cases of suicides from interactions with companions where AI systems have given like detail by detail instruction for teenagers and minors to harm themselves and to commit suicide. So the question should be, why are we doing that, and why are we not controlling that?
We'll come back to that in a second round of questions.
Thank you.
Let me remind you that there is Slido, and you can be putting questions there so that towards the end, hopefully we'll have time, not only for questions from the floor through voice, but also through Slido. I don't see the Slido QR code there, but if we can put it for a little bit and then come back to the panelists, it would be great, because maybe not everyone picked it up. Yarin.
So I'm going to start by apologizing because I'm very much under the weather. And thank you. I made an effort to come here today because I thought it's a really nice opportunity.
Thank you.
I think a lot of the things that you talk about is basically systematic issues with data-based, like techniques which are based on data that you use from the web. So basically these often end up perpetuating biases. I'm going to talk about a different perspective on that. Before that, I just want to make a correction. I'm here under private capacity. I'm not representing government in any ways. So my view is that the Turing test is aspirational at measuring progress towards maybe like general AI, but ultimately it's lacking. Like, I think what I have in mind reflects a lot of what was discussed earlier today, but I also have some concrete ways forward to like how to actually measure things in that case. So like first of all, like why is the Turing test itself lacking? So a naive interpretation of that is that basically you get someone to sit in front of a computer and interact with it, talk to it. If the AI passes the test, if you can't tell the difference if it's a person or an AI on the other side. But if I were to sit next to a computer, if Gary were to sit next to a computer, we would get very different results than if my grandmother were to sit in front of the computer and interact with it. Basically, we're lacking some parts in the definition of the test in that sense. I know how to probe for hard problems that the AI would fail on, while a person on the other side would find easy to solve. And a lot of the examples that Gary gave earlier, like draw a picture with 4 arms, it's something that you would be very unlikely to have another person on the other side failing on that example. There's like other examples, like current AI systems are poor at acquiring new skills and abilities from experience in the real world. This can be characterized as looking at a test probing for the average use case compared to looking at probing for the hard use cases. In machine learning, we call these tail events, and Gary was alluding to that also as like distribution shift or out of distribution. Tail events are much harder to solve than the average ones, but these are often the ones that the problems that we actually care about, the ones that we actually need to solve in order to automate things robustly, or like saying making progress towards general AI. The equivalent in autonomous driving, for example, would be highway driving compared to city center driving. So highway driving is mostly has been solved for a long time now. Most highway driving data is kind of the same. Like no matter how long you're gonna drive on the highway, you're gonna mostly see the same stuff you've seen again and again. But all the interesting tail or edge cases, that ones that we care about, like, will be like in city driving, interacting with other drivers in lots of unpredictable situations. And these are much, much harder to solve. Our progress to date, even autonomous driving, you see actually, you mentioned Elon Musk earlier. So Elon, I remember in 2016, said like in a couple of years time, we're going to solve autonomous driving. And it's been 9 years now. We've made progress, just to be clear, but we mostly, like by geofencing cars. So by effectively overfitting to San Francisco, we can get cars to be able to drive inside city center in San Francisco. But that does not solve the generalization problem. How can we get a car that will generalize to any new locale and adapt to any new city? So effectively, as a way to maybe tweak the Turing test, I propose a variation where the Turing test's aspiration aims to assess general task solving. So I propose to change it to whatever human-like cognitive skill that I choose, the entity on the other side of the screen should be able to solve it at least as well as the other average person. So basically looking more to like a minimax definition of Turing test rather than the average case definition. Of course, I can come up with stricter definitions like solve at least as well as the best person that can solve that, but even this variation is already a challenge to how to operationalize it.
Thank you. Go away from the average. Kaitlyn?
Thank you. So I come at this from a very different perspective. My work is on digital and AI literacy, and I spend a lot of time in schools. And last year, I was in a school with a group of 15-year-olds. And one girl, let's call her Maddie, said to me, I now use ChatGPT to text my friends because I think it does a better job at it than I can. And so Maddie was losing her confidence in her own ability to communicate with her friends. Last week, the BBC launched a big report on young people's digital lives. And it had multiple prongs, which included a 2,000-person survey over 3 years and a series of qualitative projects that I worked on with them. And one of the themes that came out was this generational divide in AI usage. So kids and parents were using AI quite differently. So for Gen X and millennials, they were, for the most part, using AI to support pre-existing expertise. But for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they were increasingly, over the 3 years, they were increasingly using AI instead of developing that expertise. And by expertise, I literally mean social, emotional, cognitive development. So the questions I ask in my work is, what happens if you don't have to learn to write the email? What happens if you don't have the opportunity to do the law clerking? What happens if you don't have to call the landline to speak to your crush only to suffer the torture of talking to their mother first? What happens if we don't do those things? And so in asking if the Turing test is still relevant, I think for young people, the question isn't so much about whether machines can think, but rather how much of our thinking, or more specifically, the development of our thinking, is acceptable to outsource. And more practically, what is the responsibility to shift and to supplement through our education system, through our parenting, through our society, in order to support young people, in order to support our kids, in order to support Maddie. Thank you.
Gary, they're all yours. Respond.
So I just heard all of this for the first time. I'm mostly just going to amplify and distill because I really like all of the remarks. And so I'll take something from each of them. Abeba is really talking ultimately about, in part, about how these systems perpetuate past bias, right? If you and Yarin had a nice way of putting it too. If you have a system that is primarily there to mimic the data, that's what you get is perpetuation of past bias. In fact, Abeba didn't have time to say this, but one of her most striking findings is that some biases actually get worse with scaling. So many things get better with scaling, but perpetuation of past bias, she has shown, actually gets worse as you have more data. The systems get more locked into the stereotypes. That's not a logical necessity for any AI. A good AI, you should be able to not just understand the past bias, but, for example, have a constraint and say, don't do this anymore. We, as a society, have decided that these biases are not good. They're stupid. They're anchored in history in various ways, and we want to be done with it. But we don't have that AI yet. And I'll tie this also to one of my own points, which is that intelligence is multidimensional. And so you can have a system that is better at brainstorming and worse at perpetuating past bias, as she has shown. And it's really important, I think, to understand that. Yarin emphasized a point that is very close to my own heart, which is about transfer and generalization. And this is what much of my work has been for many decades. It's one thing to mimic stuff, and it ties again in a different way, and it's another thing to be able to reason about them in a fresh way. And that really should be the mark of intelligence. I mean, one mark of intelligence is like, can you match humans? And we've talked about that. But independently of where humans fit in, what you want a system to be able to do is to face new problems and come up with new solutions. We don't want a lookup table. We want something that we can trust to address new problems. So I'm very much sympathetic there. And I think the deep point in Kaitlyn's talk is really about responsibility to society. What are we building here? Where is this going to leave society? So even if we have the technical know-how to build something like AGI, which we certainly do not yet, but even once we do, we still have to ask, like, what is this going to do to humanity? And also another piece of what she's talking about is AI literacy. How are we going to teach people to deal with this? One thing that just absolutely boggles my mind is how much lawyers keep making their briefs with ChatGPT, which keeps making up cases which hallucinate. This is a failure of AI literacy to massive scale, right? We expect lawyers to read the newspapers, and yet the only thing that I know that is actually exponentially growing is the number of lawyers each day making briefs with made-up cases. There's actually some data on this. And that's, this is one example among many, but we're failing to teach society how skeptical they need to be of these machines. That's, an instance of very needed AI literacy. So I was very sympathetic to all of the remarks.
Please put questions on Slido because they are very fast and we'll have a lot of time and we won't know what to do with it unless you do have questions. But I have a second round of questions for each of you. And of course, you can ignore the question and answer whatever you want. But, Abeba, let me ask you. You talked about white supremacy. You talked about biases, of course, and how they are perpetuated. But also, you said that some companies, a whole bunch of companies, do go this way on purpose. Not that it happened and they don't know what to do with it, and maybe they hit it a little bit, but they go for that on purpose. And you ask, why are they doing it? Well, it's obvious, money, power, fast cars, whatever is that people want. But what is the antidote? Is there an antidote? What can we do as society to go after these bastards?
I have a short answer and a long answer, but I'll go. The short answer is I'll go with the long one, which is that going back to your earlier question, talking about when Turing proposed can machines think 75 years ago, you have different objectives, different emphasis. A lot of the thinking was grounded in science, in scientific thinking, advancing science. Forward 75 years later, most of that is gone. You have a handful of major big corporations that care very little about the science, but care about the core business model, which is maximizing profit and garnering as much power as possible. And as a result, it's really, we've seen so many disasters. Facebook has been implicated in genocides in Myanmar. They have literally destroyed democracy. And currently you have AI companions that are intentionally designed to keep minors and young users really glued to these apps at any cost. As a result, they kind of perpetuate your delusion instead of pushing you away, or instead of encouraging you to spend little time. So that means the priority for the current AI industry, especially on the business side, which is product development, which is slightly different from research, is really, as I said, profit maximization and becoming as powerful as possible. And companies like Google have become now too large to regulate, too large to manage. So I think the immediate answer would be regulation. But as we are seeing, even Europe, that's supposed to have strong regulation and enforcement, is really kind of falling, is being captured by the interests of big corporations. You have companies like Meta and OpenAI creating a pact and putting billions for positive technology, which means for fighting regulation. So even in Europe, we are seeing, deregulation, watering down regulation, delaying regulation, and other mechanisms and tactics. So in order for regulation to work, I think we need massive public awareness, and people have to, currently a lot of what we know about AI comes from big corporates and their PR, and what you hear about AI, and we do in my lab, we do a lot of evaluation and audits, and what you find these technologies do is different stories. So I think we need much more public awareness about the reality of AI, how AI works, rather than what big tech corporations say about what AI is. I think that will kind of raise awareness so that people can refuse, so that people can resist, which will force governments and regulators to do something about it. That's my view, at least. Yeah.
We have to act, and hopefully proact instead of react, but yeah. Yarin, Alan Turing posed the question, can machines think? And it seems that he proposed the Turing test as more of a philosophical thought experiment than a practical means of defining machine intelligence. However, today, in different ways, as I said, in a more general way, it is often regarded as the ultimate target for AIs to fool people, to demonstrate anyway what is called AGI. As a researcher who has done both theoretical and applied machine learning, what do you think? Does the Turing test capture AGI? If not, what could replace it? You already answered this, but can you elaborate a little bit more on what should the researchers, young and wise?
So the example I gave earlier is just like one idea. I think, as you mentioned, Turing test is more aspirational, philosophical, but what we do need is concrete measures of progress in the field. And designing tests, or evals, as people call these days, is actually really, really hard. We can see that progress reports showing a steady linear increase in capabilities of GPT-3 to 4 to 5, even though users interacting with GPT-4 versus GPT-5 show that the perceived capabilities are basically mostly the same. Existing measures of progress in the field, if you look at that specific question of like how much do we progress towards like general capabilities AI, are very much lacking, and which leads to people to think that AI is advancing much faster than the actual rate of progress is. And this does actually have material effects in terms of like policy design, for example. We need new realistic tests. We need new like, objectives which are divorced from prior beliefs and ideological stances. The example I gave earlier is just like one example of like a harder way, like a way to make the Turing test harder, but we still need to figure out like how to operationalize that, or like any other idea that will basically try to actually capture progress in the field better.
When we start with metrics, how do we measure whatever we are trying to measure? Great, thank you. Kaitlyn, you are the author of Smartphone Nation, a book very fresh out of the oven. This is not an advertisement, but I checked it out. Go and buy it. Whereas a quote-unquote digital nutritionist, you show us how to consume digital content in a safe, non-addictive way. With increasingly more AIs passing the Turing test in the general sense and being indistinguishable from humans, do you think you will be writing another book in 5 years titled AI Nation? How will you guide us then? How should we, especially children, consume agentic products and services, robotic interactions, etc.?
Thank you. I hope it doesn't take 5 years. I'm writing it right now. So just to contextualize, I think it's really important for us to understand that most parents are very digitally illiterate, not even AI illiterate. We are dealing with a predominantly digitally illiterate adult population. Most parents still use screen time guidance, and screen time guidance is really based on physical health and childhood diabetes research, which said, if a kid is in front of a screen, they're not moving around as much, and that's not good for their physical health. That guidance is only about the quantity of consumption, not about the quality of consumption. So by that guidance, and many parents do this, you could have, you could have your kid, they could be sitting on and watching the BBC, and you could be having an interactive conversation, or they could be on YouTube. And we know that 81% of kids from the age of 3 are on YouTube, on algorithmically driven feeds. And I worked on the Online Safety Act here in this country. I don't think it's very good, but YouTube was never in that conversation. It's not often constituted as social media. It's just left out of that conversation. So so parents' understandings is at a very base level. So yeah, my work at the moment has been about algorithmic literacy for the general public and teaching them tools like gaming their algorithm, how to push back against those processes. I think AI is different, and I think I use a food-style pyramid for people for for algorithmic literacy. I don't think this is so much about nutrition and consumption, but rather exercise. And I think maybe a helpful analogy is the advent of the car. And with the advent of the car and more sedentary vocations, a boom in research around physical health was born. And because we were not moving, because the technology did that for us, we needed to start to artificially move. We saw gym culture emerge in PE class, because people weren't moving, because technology was moving for us. And I think a really helpful analogy, I hope, for parents, and what I'm working on at the moment, is a gym for the AI age. a social emotional gym, a social emotional PE class, essentially in schools. So what do we now need to supplement if AI is increasingly doing things for us and children are not having to move their minds?
So from a digital nutritionist, you'll become a digital trainer. In the
I don't
gym.
know if I'm a PE teacher.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, even better, even better. Gary, a couple of years back, you were among the signatories of a letter calling for a 6-month moratorium on powerful AI training until safety measures were in place. Everyone's goal these days is for AIs to pass the Turing test with flying colors in the general sense of the test. Would you go the other way? Would you suggest that in parallel with AI functionality advances, we should also try to make sure that no AI passes the Turing test?
I mean, I think that ship has flown, whatever the expression is I'm looking for. We have AIs now that pass the Turing test, but it is interesting to think about that pause letter, which I did sign. I didn't agree with every word of it. We had this pause letter a couple of years ago. I thought it was more emphasizing kind of rogue runaway AI than some of the contemporary risks that we already face around things like bias, and now we have AI-induced delusions and so forth. So there was some balance that I didn't think was quite right on that letter. But what I thought was really important about that letter was that it called for much more emphasis on AI safety. I thought there was a premise that was wrong. A lot of the people who signed the letter thought we were going to die if GPT-5 came. And my joke about that was, so suppose China gets GPT-5 first. Are they going to use that to take over Taiwan, this kind of system that has hallucinations? Let them do their military strategy with GPT-5. What are they going to do, write boilerplate text faster than us? And as it came to pass, GPT-5 came, the United States got it first, and nothing happened. So I thought all of the worries about the specifics were wrong, but the worry that we're spending too much of our time racing ahead on these models and not enough time studying safety is really important. And if you go back and read the letter carefully, which almost nobody did, there is a part in there that says we should do more research on AI safety. It did not say we shouldn't work on AI, we should not distribute AI. Like a lot of people thought it meant don't use AI anymore, burn everybody at the stake who's involved. It didn't say that. It said we should have more investigations of how to keep this stuff safe. That is still true. I think I have a longer timeline, as we call it in the trade, than other people do. I think it might take us 10 or 20 years to get to so-called AGI, and I don't think it's going to come in 2027 like some people do. But suppose we have 10 or 20 years. Think how long it takes to make a treaty, which is an idea that's come up a few times today and that I have pushed for. It takes like 8 years to get a treaty done. Like, these are not overnight things. You get all these countries involved. We should be working on that now, even if we do have 10 or 20 years to play with. We should absolutely be working on AI safety. And the other point that I'll pull out of it is there's a difference between banning AI deployments that might be unsafe and banning AI research. I've never favored banning research into AI if it's contained in a sandbox and people, the issues start to come up when you say, I've got this new product, let's call it Sora 2 for the sake of argument, which, oh, did someone use that name? And let's say, hypothetically, that it made AI slop at mass scale. So it made really garbage videos with no educational content, but it was sticky in the way that TikTok was sticky. And let's say we got our whole population hooked on this thing. Would that be a good idea? How about we do a study first, a small-scale study, and see, is this, good for our children? Probably it's not, Maybe we shouldn't deploy it then yet. So there's a difference between saying, I'm going to go build Sora 2 and see if I can solve the world model physics problem with it. No, you won't, but, go ahead and try. And saying, I'm going to release this thing without thinking at all about the consequences for the world. And the structure we have right now is all of those decisions about whether to release something are made by a very small number of people with not even any voice of the government at all, let alone scientists. and so forth. And that's not good. So no, I wouldn't shut down AI. Look, we passed the Turing test, so be it. But let's think a lot about safety, both in the sort of immediate term, like AI delusions, and the long term, like runaway AI. Let's think a lot more about that, put a lot more resources into that.
We do have time for questions, but I'll go first to the sliders because we haven't done that yet, and then I'll go to you, and then back to Slido and so on. The most popular question says, question for Gary, but anyone can answer all. How should we educate politicians, oh God, that AI...
Was that an oxymoron?
Yeah. That AI CEOs are not gods, that LLMs are unreliable, that AI is unlikely to deliver much touted productivity gains?
It's very hard. There's an old phrase I'm going to try to vary. It's very difficult to educate a man or a woman when their wallet is standing in the way, right? I think a lot of this is about money. I spent a lot of time in D.C. a couple of years ago, and there was genuine interest from a reasonable number of senators about how all this stuff works. There was even one congressperson going to school to get a master's in machine learning. But what really rules the day is the lobbying organizations that have enormous amounts of money. Like there was just a new, what we call in the States, PAC, a political action committee, founded with like $100 million from Andreessen and I think OpenAI put in money. And the point of that is to try to annihilate anyone like Abeba or me who speaks up and says, that there are actually problems here. That is the point of that organization. So unless the public stands up, and this also goes to one of Abeba's points, and says, this is not good, it's not going to improve. I mean, fundamentally right now, we don't have enough political will, and I don't think people are looking far enough down the road to see how this is all going to play out. We have actually a nice demonstration of how it's all played out, which is social media that we decided to give exemption from liability with Section 230 in the United States, and that has had huge negative consequences on society. And when I was there 2 years ago at the Senate, in the US Senate, all the senators acknowledged they had screwed up. They said, we took too long, we did the wrong things, how can we do better? But in the last several months, they've all backed away, and it's all under economic and political pressure, with a side helping of FOMO, of, oh my God, the Chinese are going to get there first, and we can't have that, and so forth. And so right now, it's pretty hard to get through. It's a little bit easier in the EU, I think. There's some people in the parliament here, for example, who I'm quite fond of, who are really pushing for, let's say, suitable regulation. But it's hard right now.
And
Can I
we...
quickly add?
Yeah, we have to unite, as you said, and let me say that ACM has a Technology Policy Council and also regional committees in Europe, the US, and elsewhere, and it's trying to do exactly that. And we need to team up with scientists, not just computer scientists, but also social scientists and so on, and pass the message. We have pathways to politicians, and indeed, the EU and in the UK, we've had more successes than the US, but we have to keep fighting coming over.
I never volunteer for these things, but I'll volunteer for that one.
Absolutely, okay. Please take note. All of you, yeah, Abeba, you had a comment.
Just to quickly add, I'm an academic. I do research mostly, and until a few years back, I used to also think, how do we educate, policymakers? How do we give them the right tools to understand the implication of these technologies? But over the past few years, as I started getting more involved in spaces where regulators gather, where policymaking is happening, one of them serving as part of the AI advisory body for the UN alongside Wendy here. And what you find is that the more you know, the more you realize, the objectives and the visions of tech CEOs in big tech corporations are pretty much aligned with governments, especially those with authoritarian tendencies, because they see this technology as a way to control and manipulate the population in a way they want. And also, look at surveillance is everywhere, and London is probably one of the most surveilled places. Again, this is another opportunity to equip governments with tools that allow them to proceed in a way. Now you have technologies used for migration control, border control, and so on. So I guess the point I want to make here is that it's not that the regulators don't necessarily know, it's just that they are also aligned with the bigger objective of tech CEOs and corporations.
And to that point, I just read an interview or something with Larry Ellison, just sort of taking surveillance for granted and saying we want to do this. We have come a really long way from Steve Jobs and think different. You know, we had an era where I think AI was very much in support of the individual person to maximize their creativity, to now the only way that these guys are going to make money is by selling your very personal data where you typed into ChatGPT, you know, how your last date went or something like they want to sell that stuff now. It's a very different model than 20 years ago when AI was more, I mean, tech was a more positive force.
One question from the audience. Oh boy. There. Yeah, you. Who looked on the... No, but you, please go ahead, yes. Yeah, please go. Wait for the mic. Wait for the mic.
I'm a retired academic. You keep mentioning security. What is the ACM going to do to improve matters, and what does the panel think the ACM should do?
Let's start with a should. ACM is certainly doing research on security and safety and all that. We have a special interest group exactly on that. And then we have the Technology Policy Council that looks into that. We have a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council that looks into biases and things like this. We have Words Matter, which is an initiative that looks into words that should not be used in papers or should not be used as data and examples in papers and so on. So we have a suite of things that we are doing as a professional society guiding the community. What more should we do? Panel?
It's not what the ACM should do. The ACM is actually doing more or less the right set of things that I think they should be doing. The problem is society is right now not listening to academics, to scientists, to organizations like this. It's listening to money. And so what we really need is for everybody in this room to go to their representatives and say, you need to listen to scientists, you need to listen to organizations like ACM who are actually studying problems like how could we solve security, what do we need to do here, and so forth. What we really need to do is to move away from regulatory capture where basically the governments are working in the service of the companies and have a community global movement to say, you need other voices here.
But the more you pressure us, the more we'll do. Go what, there to your right. No, not for no to the other side. The other side.
Yeah.
Well, wait.
Thank you. I'll be real quick. I'm so grateful for this panel. I'm Frode Hagelin, Future of Text. There is one aspect, one word that just came up by Marcus, which is tools. What tools can we make? It's great doing the education. It's great talking to the politicians. But how can we make tools to help us use AI to creatively think? We're living in a more linear world, and there is a story that I thought Alan Kay would mention today of Doug Engelbart and Marvin Minsky, where Marvin Minsky says, we're going to make machines intelligent, and Doug said, why not make people intelligent? So I'm wondering, what we're doing, the Future of Text, next year will all be about how to use AI to make us more intelligent, not think for us. If the panel has any thoughts on this, I would be extremely grateful. Thank you.
I would love to see that happen. I think that is one of the use cases for artificial general intelligence is to, for example, tutor people in creativity, tutor people in critical thinking and so forth. I don't think we have the right tools for that now. I don't think that's something we can build with the existing technologies. So for example, critical thinking is something that the AI systems themselves are not very good at. You could imagine AI systems that had a deeper conceptual understanding of the world that might be really good at that. And I once got in was in a panel with Daniel Kahneman, who's been mentioned a bunch of times today, and he said something like, humans are a really low bar, and he's famous for all of his work on cognitive biases and so forth. And I said, yeah, and yet AI still can't beat it. Someday it will. Someday it will. That's what we should be driving for, is AI that can help us with our cognitive biases. So, for example, we're very, very much afflicted with confirmation bias. We notice evidence in favor of our own theories, and we don't notice evidence against, and that leads to polarization in society, which is where we are now. It's a huge mess. I can certainly think of an AI that could help with that. I don't think it's something we can build quite yet, but we should aspire to it.
These are the tools that you need for your gym, Kaitlyn.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, right. We are out of time, but we will not end until this gentleman gets the mic.
Thank you. Actually, my question is about the integration or use of AI. I mean, every time in education, every time I think of many of my colleagues who advocate for the use of AI, it's like a Thanksgiving turkey praying for Thanksgiving. Yet, there's an increasing push in universities to integrate AI into our lectures, into our teaching. I'm somewhat flummoxed and perplexed by what's happening, and it's easy for folks who have tenure to push back. I mean, I do, but then I think of a lot of my colleagues who are not in a position to say, no, we don't want to do this. Can you think of any arguments that might actually convince the deans and the associate deans and universities to maybe reconsider this haste and adoption of AI?
I mean, I think one thing I would start with is this recent MIT study that showed, which I mentioned, that shows that 95% of experiments in AI have not returned an investment. And I would say, do you have data that education is any different from these other kinds of investment? Is the money going in actually producing demonstrably better results here? And I don't think anybody's going to have that data for you. So I would start there almost Socratically saying, here's this other example. Why should we think this is any different?
Yarin?
Can I give a counter-argument to that, and also relating to the previous question? And I can join that from what we have at Oxford, actually. So whether you like it or not, students will be using ChatGPT in their day-to-day, like in courses and writing essays and anything that they're going to do. I think the correct thing that we should do is teach them how to use it responsibly. So teach them about when they should, teach them about course referencing, course checking, the stuff that it spews out. Teach them that it can hallucinate and make stuff up. So there's a bunch of skills that they need to know how to use, because again, you might not like it, but when they're gonna go into the job market in a few years' time, they will be expected to have those skills. And there's already in the news only from a few days ago that some companies decided that unless you're gonna have proficiency in using AI, basically you're gonna start doing layoffs. So these are things that I would prefer to teach the students how to use that responsibly, rather than just telling them we ignore this existence of those.
I completely agree with that, and I've been trying to teach teachers to do that, to give exercises like have the machine solve 10 calculus problems. You'll see that it gets 8 of them right and 2 of them wrong. You learn something about where we are now. So I fully agree. I don't believe in interdiction. But at the same time, I think what this gentleman is talking about is there are a lot of universities that are trying to push AI everywhere. So on the one hand, you have students that are going to use it in their papers, and I think we should teach those students to use it responsibly, exactly the way that you said. But on the other hand, there's this pressure to use it to write your curriculum, for example, as a faculty member, and I think the faculty should resist some of that.
Who's pushing for that? And that's the first time I hear about that.
There are whole universities. I get emails about this kind of thing now, where the university says we got to do this stuff. It's just like when the companies.
That sounds awful, yeah.
But it actually happens. It's like a lot of CEOs last year told their CTOs, we've got to use AI. And the smart CTOs would say, well, in what particular way did you want to use it, and with which particular tools? And then they would say, we got to use AI. We're getting behind. And so some of the universities are doing that. I'm not going to name names. I'll tell you off stage about some examples. But it is a thing that's happening. I thought that's what the question is about. And that's the thing I would say.
I'll quickly say, I mean, the fear of missing out is real in education, coming from higher level management at universities and from governments also really pushing. But to come back to your question, me as an evaluator, the first thing I would demand is, for anything we integrate or implement in our classrooms, or anything to do with, concerning the well-being of our children, if someone wants to push, some kind of medication or, medical devices, imagine the kind of testing and imagine the kind of rigorous criteria that would be required before that medical device is applied. Why is education any different? So we have to demand actual, systematic, rigorous evidence that shows that there is actually a difference. It actually benefits. And the second point I want to make is that, the bringing AI into education is undoubtedly and inherently marks the commercialization of education. And education in and of itself is a public good. You are in a classroom to, contribute to kind of shepherd the next generation, to develop empathy, love, care, emotional intelligence, and so on. These are things not only AI is unable to do, but also these are things that have no utility from a business model, from a commercial value. And by kind of handing over education to, and now we are seeing like OpenAI and Meta and Google, the usual suspect, they are the ones that are pushing education in the classroom. Even though it might be free now, eventually they are the ones that will really capitulate and they become the guardians of education. If anything is to go by from the behavior of these companies that we have seen, they are not to be trusted. They can't be the guardians of education. They can't be the guardians of any public good. So we really have to push back. And there is a lot of movement to resist AI in the classroom. So yeah, create allyships and join those movements. And the more we are, the more visible we are, and the better our voices come here.
Kaitlyn?
That's a fantastic point, and I think it trickles all the way down. I mean, we see now this big pushback against ed tech. We had 10 years ago this need to give kids iPads. And we thought that was a really good thing, and that was really part of kind of this digital literacy movement, as like kids need to learn to use an iPad. They're doing a really good job of that. And now you see schools taking the iPads back, trying to kind of wheel back on that. And I think one of the most troubling things is we're now seeing schools use technology that essentially Apple is selling to them or Microsoft is selling them to help kids deal with addictions that they created for them. Yes. And that is a bizarre situation that we have got into, which we have allowed to happen, for them to help us fix the problems they made for us. And so I think what we need to be really doing is getting educators on board, getting society on board, because I absolutely agree, policy follows the public will. But the public will only be there if they understand it. We can't actually this is a great event today. I love it so much. Yeah. Most people aren't at these events. Most people don't think they can understand these things. Most people think it's too complicated for them to understand. And so they bury their heads in the sand. And we know that happened with social media. And we know that through the work of Frances Hogan and the Facebook board data, that kids were left to navigate that space alone because their parents felt they didn't understand it. And so what I'm really concerned about at the moment is making these ideas accessible, removing these ideas outside of university settings, these amazing settings which are important, but trying to make these ideas much more accessible so that people can start to advocate, collectivize and advocate, because policy follows the public will. Thank you.
17 more comments to be made by the panel, but we have to stop. We are a bit over time, or a bit more than a bit. Thank you so much. This was amazing.
Thank you.